Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today. Today I am joined by Kevin Thompson, who is the Director of National Telecommunications Practice at Deloitte Consulting. Kevin, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Dan. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great. So today we're hoping to talk a little bit about spectrum, which is obviously an important aspect of the wireless telecommunications industry. Some would say that without spectrum, none of this would actually work. But beyond that point there, we want to, I guess, get a kind of general view from Deloitte and from Kevin, kind of where we are in the spectrum space, the importance of spectrum, how the government is kind of doing it and getting more spectrum out there. So I kind of general conversation about that topic. So maybe start off with Kevin, I guess, maybe your view and maybe Deloitte's general view of, maybe it's a basic question, but kind of, I guess, the importance of spectrum to the wireless market. It does seem like it's becoming more and more important over the years, obviously with more data services coming online. It does seem like spectrum is a pretty important aspect of the wireless market.
Sure, absolutely. Spectrum is the foundational enabler of the mobile industry, quite frankly, and it's increasingly becoming a critical component not only for the industry but underlying other U.S. industries that rely on mobile broadband, and thus is becoming an important contributor to the U.S. economy. Deloitte has developed a Mobile Communications National Achievement Index that demonstrates that the U.S. is in the enviable position of being the global leader in mobile broadband, and this has enabled the U.S. to reap substantial economic benefit and societal benefits that are enjoyed by both the consumers and the various U.S. industries that are using mobile broadband services and capabilities to strengthen their global competitive edge. Other countries are recognizing the importance and value of mobile broadband and are aggressively pursuing capabilities to challenge the U.S. in its leadership position in this, and positioning themselves for a time when the U.S. might become vulnerable due to a mobile spectrum supply shortage. So the spectrum is really fundamentally critical to get that into the marketplace and ensure that shortage doesn't occur and put the U.S. at risk in terms of mobile broadband leadership.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe looking at over the past 25, 30 years of the mobile industry here, I guess what's the general view of how well the U.S. has done in at least getting spectrum out there? It does seem like in the initial 15 to 20 years, the industry was able to operate on relatively small amount of spectrum for the most part. It was voice services, texting, but over the past 10 years, it does seem like that need has definitely ramped up. What's the general view of how well the government's done in supplying that resource to the industry?
Sure. So measures that influence spectrum supply have arguably been the most important and instrumental policy force that the government has applied in terms of affecting mobile broadband over the last couple of decades. Over this period of time, the FCC has supported formation of the mobile broadband ecosystem by making more spectrum available and generally speaking, permitting market forces to operate. So, for example, from the 1994 to 2000 time frame, the FCC auctions essentially tripled the amount of spectrum available for commercial mobile services. In around 2003 or so, the FCC removed spectrum caps, making it possible for carriers to aggregate sufficient spectrum for development and deployment of mobile broadband. And the FCC permitted U.S. carriers to buy and sell spectrum. This was a critically important enabler for the industry, for the carriers to make more efficient use of the airwaves, allow those carriers with the greatest value generation potential to purchase spectrum from those other carriers who maybe didn't have an opportunity to use it as efficiently or effectively. So the net of this is those market-oriented actions collectively or in aggregate created a favorable regulatory environment, and that has permitted the industry investments and developments around mobile broadband to flourish. Now, with that said, while there's been significant progress made by the U.S. government to avoid a supply shortage, the collective set of completed and planned actions by the government appear to be falling short relative to the objectives that the federal government set and the timetable established in the 2010 National Broadband Plan. So it's important that to ensure continued leadership, the United States government should redouble its efforts to put sufficient spectrum into the marketplace in the next few years for the wireless carriers.
Yeah. For those who don't remember the National Broadband Plan, that was initially, like you said, in 2010. I think the government wanted to get 500 megahertz, up to 500 megahertz of new spectrum out to the market over a 10-year period, which at that time seemed like a very big daunting task. And and obviously they've done some, but like you said, we're 5 years into this almost now, and I think we're pretty well short of 500 megahertz being freed up. So it does seem like you said, it does have to be a redoubling of efforts to make sure, if they want to at least meet that plan, that they do some new moves to get that spectrum out there. So a bit of a challenge there. Well, I mean, you talked about earlier about I guess that the U.S. has enjoyed kind of a leadership position in wireless since its inception of the wireless industry. Obviously with mobile broadband, especially with LTE rollouts for carriers, it's been very much at the forefront. I guess looking worldwide, I mean, is that position threatened? Who's threatening that position? How important is it for the U.S. to I guess maintain that position as being a leader in this market worldwide?
Sure. Well, if we first talk about how the U.S. Stands in terms of its mobile broadband leadership, it has effectively been the mobile broadband leader over the past decade, and that's been fueled by substantial carrier investment, the extensive entrepreneurial ecosystem that has been built up around that, which has generated a pipeline of compelling mobile broadband innovations. We've got a broad and involved user base, both from a consumer and from a business perspective. And I'd already mentioned the market-oriented regulatory environment or framework in which the U.S. policymakers have established to make additional spectrum available, lift the spectrum caps, and generally speaking, permitted market forces to operate. When you look at some underlying metrics of this, I mentioned our Mobile Communications National Achievement Index, and the underlying metrics associated with that index have collectively enabled the U.S. to establish that leadership. So, for example, if you look at LTE deployment, U.S. is number one. That's critical for the strength and the advancement of the mobile ecosystem. We had toward the end of last year, LTE networks covered roughly 90% of the U.S. population. It was, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of a little bit less than half of the population covered in Europe, maybe 10% of the population in Asia. So substantial LTE coverage. When you look at subscribers, U.S. has about 5% of global wireless subscribers, yet more on the order of about 50% of the 4G subs. Also has dominant position in other critical aspects of the ecosystem. U.S. companies provide about roughly 96% of the global mobile smartphone operating system shipments, have an extensive developer ecosystem, developing apps around that. And even from a smartphone perspective, U.S. companies produced roughly 17% of all smartphone shipments in the 2013 timeframe. And then finally, as I previously mentioned, the mobile ecosystem has become a critical component of the economy. Underpins productivity, it underpins innovation and growth across numerous U.S. industries, a broad swath of the U.S. economy. There's on a going forward basis, there's great potential in emerging mobile applications and capabilities. Telematics is already here and continuing to grow. Mobile health is a very exciting and hot topic, and I think there's tremendous potential there. Mobile commerce, obviously, is well underway. So whether it's something more straightforward or more intuitive, such as equipping a mobile workforce, or enabling consumers to be more informed and more productive in their daily lives, these wireless communications have become, and the mobile broadband capabilities around that have become deeply embedded, not only in our society, but across the U.S. industry makeup as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. It does seem like that the U.S. government has done a pretty good job in having a somewhat of a hands-off approach, perhaps, when it comes to the regulatory environment. Not requiring carriers to deploy certain spectrum bands and certain technologies. I know that's an old, go back to technology wars a long time ago, but carriers were allowed to kind of do what they wanted to do and weren't required to use certain bands, and as other regions were. So it did seem to really help out the U.S. market and getting I guess a leadership position there. And again, like you said, some of the carriers too have been very aggressive in rolling out technology and networks and spending the money involved. So important aspects of it as well. It's definitely a good point. Is it important for the U.S. to maintain this leadership position? I mean, is it an ego kind of thing? Is it? I mean, I guess is there a need for the U.S. to continue to be that, or is it just more of kind of like you said, the fact that there is an ecosystem already in place that the U.S. will likely just continue to lead just because of what's already been laid, the foundation's already been laid for that to happen for a while?
It's a great question, and it's certainly there's much more at stake here than just bragging rights of being the global mobile broadband leader. So when you think about this, in achieving global leadership in mobile broadband, the U.S. became the world's innovation test bed, essentially, for mobile broadband devices and services. And by imparting this comparative advantage to U.S. industries, essentially on home turf, if you will, relative to global competitors in their various industry segments in which they operate, it has manifested itself in this broader economic contribution to the U.S. in terms of GDP and job growth. And if the U.S. Doesn't maintain that leadership position, and more specifically, what we think is the more pressing issue around its ability to maintain that leadership position, subject to wireless networks encountering capacity constraints, specifically related to shortfalls in available spectrum, then the advantages that leadership has or confers on the rest of the U.S. ecosystem would suffer. And if you think about how that would play out, should a shortage occur, that's going to mean some combination of higher prices or rationing of service or in many ways degraded service, and potentially some combination of all three, and that in itself would put a drag on the U.S. economy. And if the U.S. Mobile operating environment isn't as robust relative to the opportunities elsewhere around the globe, then not only would competitors abroad be able to gain ground in terms of their performance capabilities and the developments of products and services with appeal in the global markets, but we'd be at risk of jobs and profits being redirected away from the U.S. as the center for mobile innovation, and capital investment that goes with that would shift overseas. So the leadership is incredibly important for the U.S. to maintain, again, not just because of the direct benefit to the industry, but to the broader benefit that it imparts across these other U.S. industries.
Got it. I mean, does it seem like the U.S. government, and not to kind of keep rehashing this, but does it seem like the government understands that importance? I mean, obviously with the National Broadband Plan, there was this big goal to free up 500 megahertz, which seems like the government does get it. But again, over the past four or 5 years, it has been a bit slow in getting out some spectrum. I mean, does it seem from Deloitte's point of view, your point of view, that the government does understand this importance and realizes that they need to make sure that they're on top of this and kind of being able to continue to supply the industry with the necessary spectrum?
Yes, we certainly understand that the government views the importance and the value of this. We're also appreciating the complexity involved in the ability to free up spectrum. When you look at the usable bands given today's technologies for commercial mobile services, it depends on precisely how you define that usable band of spectrum, but roughly speaking, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the spectrum within that range is being used by mobile operators today, and the remaining 80 to 85% is used by a variety of other users that have developed and been allocated spectrum access and spectrum use over the last effectively 100 years, if you will. And obviously, some of those have mission-critical capabilities and requirements and obligations, whether it be for homeland security or defense or services such as that. And so it is a significant challenge for the government to be able to identify available spectrum to apply back to the mobile broadband industry. We recognize that challenge. We just want to make sure that that there's a sense of urgency around making that happen as quickly and as effectively as can be done, because of the importance of commercial mobile broadband and its impact on the U.S. economy.
Yeah, obviously very important. And like you said, Jim, there are a lot of industries, or I shouldn't say industry, but government usage, the Department of Defense, other companies or other organizations that have that use a lot of the spectrum, and that's a touchy subject when it comes to freeing up additional spectrum. I mean, obviously the DoD has done some work recently in perhaps sharing spectrum in some bands, but that is definitely a trick. And the complexity, like you said, is that's an important aspect of it, obviously something that can't be overlooked, because it is a complicated situation, especially as we try to free up more and more spectrum for wireless services or commercial services. That becomes a bigger challenge. So that's going to be difficult going forward. Do you think, I guess, looking at from the wireless industry's point of view, has the wireless industry done a good enough job in efficiently using the spectrum that it has been allocated? I mean, do you think operators and equipment vendors have done their part when it comes to making the most of what they've been given?
Absolutely. The mobile operators have been working closely with their partners in the mobile ecosystem and taking actions on multiple fronts to maximize use of the available spectrum and ensure that there's a sufficient mobile broadband supply. Examples of this include deploying 4G, which is more spectrally efficient than the previous generations of the mobile technologies, adding towers, sharing towers, deploying small cells, which operate in tandem with the traditional towers in hybrid networks, and enabling spectral reuse for a given geography, offloading traffic to Wi-Fi networks, and certainly in swapping and purchasing spectrum from each other on the secondary markets to ensure that it's getting into the hands of those operators that can make best use of it. So there's a tremendous amount of activities underway by the operators. Certainly these actions should continue on all fronts while the federal government continues its effort to enable and increase spectrum supply. There are, or I should say, we're at risk of there being diminishing returns on this at some point, and so it becomes how much performance you can squeeze out of a given amount of spectrum, and it's critically important for the government to get more spectrum into the hands of the operators so that we don't avert or we can avert a spectrum shortage. There's just too much at stake.
Yeah. That pesky physics issue often comes into play. I think we're getting close to that in a lot of issues. I know that's been brought up on a lot of shows I attend. A lot of the vendors talk about the fact that, hey, there's only so much we can really do when it comes to this. I mean, there are some laws that govern how we use spectrum, and so once we bump against those, that's all we can do. So that makes it a challenge as well. Well, I guess maybe looking forward. I mean, obviously there are spectrum auctions coming up, and the government is trying to do, is doing stuff to get more spectrum out there. I mean, I guess maybe your view of how well the government is, I guess, planning going forward. I mean, obviously not to get specifically with the auctions because that's a whole different can of worms. But does it seem like the government is at least, moving in the right direction? Are these auctions important? How important are these auctions? And are they going to help, I guess, in the near term solve perhaps some of this spectrum constraint that might be starting to creep into some carriers' networks?
Sure. Well, in terms of the importance of the upcoming auctions, these are critically important for keeping mobile broadband supply ahead of demand. As I previously mentioned, if there is a supply shortage due to insufficient spectrum supply, then the advantages that infrastructure capability confers on the rest of the U.S. ecosystem would suffer. Again, we're looking at the risk of higher prices, rationing or degraded service, and some combination of those. And again, competitors gaining ground. So these auctions are really critical to make sure that there's enough spectrum into the marketplace.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, Kevin, we definitely appreciate the insight today. And obviously, spectrum is one of those topics that thankfully is never going to go away for us, and I enjoy covering it. I know it's always a fun topic to cover, but we definitely appreciate the insight from you and from Deloitte today. Thanks so much for the time.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dan.
All right, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks again.
Okay, take care.